Hey guys, this is Nick and welcome to my Linux experiment. Now, Microsoft has made some openings towards the Linux and the open source community lately. They're finally acknowledging Linux as something that people use and want to use, and they're starting to port some of their services over. But is this really a change of heart from Microsoft, or is it just a new extend, embrace, extinguish, etc. strategy? I don't really know, but here's my opinion on this. This video is sponsored by Linode, the largest independent cloud computing provider. Linode makes it easy to give your creations their own personal space on the internet. Just about everyone needs a website these days, and if you've tested out simple drag-and-drop website providers, you know they tend to lack customization, lock your website onto their platform, and charge extra for basic features. Linode makes it as easy as possible for you to deploy enterprise-grade WordPress, Drupal, or even static websites in just seconds, using Linode's one-click apps. These apps are the same tools that businesses trust to truly own your content, make websites that are ultra-portable, and ensures you only pay for what you need. If you need something a little bit more powerful, Linode has now managed Kubernetes, and they are keeping their usual simple pricing model. There are no management fees like AWS and other cloud providers charge. They even bundle transfers, so you can significantly cut costs when compared to AWS, GCP, and Azure. With the amount you save, if you're using Kubernetes, it really doesn't make sense to use anyone but Linode. Sign up today at linode.com/linuxexperiment and get $20 in credit on your new Linode account. The link is in the description. Okay, so Microsoft has not been the champion of open source and the Linux community for ages, for as long as they existed. They are basically the champion of proprietary software. Most, if not all of their stuff is still proprietary. They're only open sourcing the stuff that they want people to use so they can drag people into Microsoft's ecosystem and systems and software. Some of their CEOs have even called Linux cancer, which is kind of strong, probably referring to the GPL license that kind of makes stuff that you add to an open source software, it makes it open source as well. But yeah, they've not been the champion of our community, not really good friends. They have not ported most of their services and software to our platform, and they have reluctantly embraced it on their Azure cloud by making their own distro called Azure Sphere. Now, they are also known for their embrace, extend, and extinguish strategy. They basically grab something, a competitor or a product or an open source thing, they try to embrace it, so they generalize their use. And then they extend it with their own modules, their own platforms that generally tie into Microsoft services. They're like, yeah, we want to embrace this technology, we want to add our own spin on it, our own stuff to it. And that's what they call extend. And finally, there's extinguish, because most people now use only the modules that they've added to the solution, because that's what ties into the Microsoft stuff that people already use. And they basically tend to shut down all the rest and make people move to their new solution based on the modules that they have implemented on the solution that they picked in the first place. So that's the embrace, extend, extinguish strategy. And it's been working pretty well for them this far, even though it's very unethical and really bad in general. And now, this paints a very dark picture of Microsoft as a company that probably cannot be redeemed in most people's eyes. And yet, Microsoft of today seems different than the Microsoft of old. So first, they are focusing on services and not on platforms anymore. Like, most of their services are available at least on one competitor, which is mostly macOS. They're not pushing Windows 10 so hard right now, they're pushing their services and software. They're pushing Office 365, they're pushing Azure, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Edge even if they're pushing this one pretty hard even on Windows users. And yeah, they're mainly geared towards services now. The Xbox Live thing, they don't try to make as much money on the system they're selling. Windows 10 is now constantly upgraded. It's basically free with the PC that you buy, or almost free. You don't really have to buy it. It's not that expensive compared to older versions of Windows, and it's getting updated constantly, even though those updates are not the best ones all the time. You don't have to pay for updates and new versions. So they're not focusing their business strategy on Windows, they're focusing it on the software that runs on Windows and sometimes on other platforms like the Mac. Well, Microsoft also has made openings towards Linux and the open source community. They have open sourced their calculator, their terminal, VS Code, and their package manager, which they basically stole off of somebody else. But those are small bits and pieces here and there, but they've also ported Microsoft Teams and VS Code to Linux, and they're probably going to bring their Microsoft Edge browser to Linux as well. So they're trying to bring their services into our platform as well. Even though some people will say we don't need them, we don't want them, that's still something that they're making towards the Linux community. They're acknowledging that us Linux users exist. But there's also the Windows subsystem for Linux, and if you look at it from outwards, it means that Microsoft really acknowledges Linux, right? Because they're shipping a Linux kernel inside of Windows. The WSL Windows subsystem for Linux, which is horrendously named because it says the exact opposite of what it does, is basically running a VM that has direct access to the hardware and running Linux inside a VM inside of Windows 10. So you can basically use Linux, run your programs, run your own web development server, whatever you want to do on Linux you can do on Windows right now. And this might seem like a good thing from the outside, right? And it really depends on your point of view there, because you might think that, yeah, people will get in contact with Linux now. Developers that were only focused on Windows will now get to grips with the Linux command line, and that might want them to switch to Linux full-time if they like what they see and they don't want the overhead of a VM. But you can also look at it the other way, which is people already using Windows and being familiar with Windows will just never switch to Linux anymore because they have all the commodity of using Linux without all the hassle that they perceive that Linux is hard to install, hard to use, not the apps that they want to use. So yeah, there's both sides of the coin here. And I was a strong proponent of the first option, like put more people in contact with Linux, put more developers in contact with Linux, they will love it and they will switch to it. But the more I think about it, the more I think people will just stick to what they know. People are reluctant to change and to adopt new stuff, and they probably won't want to switch to another system if they can have the commodity of that system inside one they already know. And then there's also the fact that the Windows subsystem for Linux now has access to DirectX, to the hardware, so you can run OpenGL programs inside your Linux VM, and that just ties in directly to DirectX 12 and then to the hardware itself. So you can also run graphical applications, compute tasks inside the VM. So even if there's a super killer app that Linux users have, but Microsoft users don't, well, Microsoft users will be able to run it on Windows inside the Linux VM, and it's gonna run graphically as well. Now once again, you might think that, hey, that's great, let's expose more people to Linux-only applications, so once they really want to use those and discover the other Linux applications, they're gonna switch to Linux. And then again, I'm thinking people would just pick the stuff that they want to use and not switch to the full system, and stay in the embrace of Windows 10 and not move to Linux, which is ultimately the goal of the Linux platform. Like, we want more people to use our stuff because we want more people to be inside the open source community, inside the open source world, and be educated about privacy, about owning your software, being able to tweak it, modify it. Now what Microsoft has done here is basically present Linux as a small subsystem of Windows, like it's something you can run on the side, but it's not really a full-blown OS. Like they're basically saying, hey, this is something you should run in a VM just for a bit of command line and a few here and there graphical applications, but it's not something that you really want to run all the time, it's just something that you want to double click on and run and then close when you don't need it. And I think that's the meaning to our OS. It's basically presenting Linux as a small subsystem, a small subfragment that can be used inside Windows, but is not really something that you want to use all the time. And I think WSL is a bad thing for Linux nowadays. I used to think the opposite. The more I think about it, the more I think WSL is bad for our community. Like, sure, it could get people to notice the advantages of Linux, like the package managers, like the bash scripting, like the speed, the command line interface that allows you to do anything that you want, some very good graphical applications that you could use. But why would you want to install a full-blown Linux OS if you can have all these advantages from the comfort of something you already know? And that's the problem here. People will not want to switch to Linux after using WSL. They will just think that they have all they need under their hands, under their fingers, and they won't need to tweak their computer, to install drivers, to move to Linux, to just learn something new. They won't need to. Now, I still have hopes and I still have doubts about Microsoft's strategy. Like, they're making 2 steps forwards and 1 step backward. Like, they released their own package manager and it's open source. But on the other hand, they basically stole it completely off of somebody else and completely forgot to mention him in the credits of the application. But then there's also the fact that Microsoft is starting to release some of their products on Linux, like Teams, VS Code, Microsoft Edge. These are products that Microsoft usually would never have released for Linux, and now there are versions of these. But these are all basically Chromium-based applications, so the framework they run on is just already available on Linux, so they basically had no specific work to do to bring these tools to Linux. Now, they haven't ported their big ones like Microsoft Office, like any of their software management, fleet computer management software. They have their Microsoft Defender ATP available on Linux, but that's just an antivirus. That's not something that most Linux users will want to run. And still, as Microsoft brings more and more of their services to Linux and to macOS 10, I cannot help but think that we're not that far away from seeing Office on Linux, or from seeing DirectX on Linux. These are steps in the direction, but on the other hand, Microsoft has gathered so many bad and ill will towards the Linux and open source community. People hate that company in our communities. And I don't think they can redeem themselves in our eyes. And I think we're always going to mistrust whatever they do because of the stuff they did in the past. And that's something I have a hard time going over. Like, I want to believe they have changed. I want to believe that they want to bring some stuff towards us, but I cannot help but see all the little small evil moves that they're making in the background. And these are hard to ignore. Whatever their real intentions are, they are still trying to slide themselves into the open source community with the purchase of GitHub, with the release of WSL, with the release of Teams, Edge, VS Code, and the exFAT driver that they're bringing into the Linux kernel. They want to slide themselves into the community, and I don't know what their intentions are, whether they really want to be a part of this, they really want to contribute, and they really want to maybe port some other services and features to our OS and to our community. Or maybe they just want to use their traditional extend, embrace, extinguish, those words are not in the right order, strategy. I really don't know. So that's it for this video. What do you guys think about Linux, Microsoft, the open source community? What are their intentions? Give me your opinions in the comments below and we'll talk about that there. So thank you guys for watching, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, don't hesitate to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and if you really want to support the channel and you really like the video, I have a Patreon page, that's the main thing I use for revenue, so you can contribute there. Patrons get access to a monthly Patreon cast, and they also get to vote on the next topics I'll work on for next month, so check it out there. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!